The Gospel according to St. Mark, the 12th chapter. Then they sent him to some Pharisees and some Herodians to trap him in what he said. And they came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Should we pay them or should we not?" Not knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why are you putting me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me see it." And they brought one. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Jesus said to them, "Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were utterly amazed at him. Some Sadducees who say there is no resurrection came to him and asked him a question, saying, "Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no child, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. There were 7 brothers. The first one married, and when he died, left no children. And the second married the widow and died, leaving no children. And the third likewise. None of the 7 left children. Last of all, the woman herself died. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? For the 7 had married her." Jesus said to them, "Is it not this the reason you were wrong, that you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God? For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are angels, like angels in heaven. And as for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses the story about the bush, how God said to him, 'I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob'? He is God, not of the dead, but of the living. You are quite wrong." One of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another. And seeing that he answered them well, he asked them, "Which commandment is the first of all?" The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. Here is our story so far. Elias and Abigail have had their young donkey taken from their home by Jesus' disciples. Jesus had instructed the disciples to tell the owner of the colt that the Lord has need of it. Both Elias and Abigail are shaken and upset that the donkey was taken without their permission, and Elias is determined to find out who took the colt and where they went with it. Elias's friends tell him that the group that took his donkey were headed toward Jerusalem, and Elias goes off to get his animal back. So leaving Abigail behind, he heads to Jerusalem and comes upon Jesus on his colt. There is a crowd gathered, and they're rejoicing and singing praises for the man riding his donkey. He can hardly believe what he's seeing. The crowd is throwing palm branches down before him and taking their robes off and flinging them on the ground before him. Elias is amazed. Something about this man touched him deeply, so deeply that he felt the need to find out more about him. He returns home and tries to explain his feelings to his wife, Abigail, but Abigail is not so sure. The next morning, the two of them travel to Jerusalem for Passover. This is a trip they have taken every year, but this year, Elias is even more excited to make the trip. He's eager to meet up with the man he saw on his donkey. He knows there is something special about him, and he wants Abigail to meet him and hear him talk. Again, Abigail is weary. She's fearful there may be trouble. Sure enough, the couple arrives at the temple just in time to see Jesus turning over the tables of the money changers and causing havoc. Abigail warns her husband that challenging the traditions and rituals of the temple can only bring disaster upon this Jesus. Elias still wants Abigail to experience what he experienced when he watched Jesus riding into Jerusalem on their donkey. This evening, we find Elias and Abigail discussing what they've seen since they arrived in Jerusalem.
Tell me, why do you insist on seeing this man?
I've told you, Abby, Jesus is not a troublemaker. I know that you've only seen what happened at the temple with the money changers, but I assure you that he is someone special.
You keep insisting that if I see him, I will change my mind. I don't mean to doubt you, but you can't deny the evidence I've seen with my own eyes. And it is evidence of a troublemaker. There is talk all over town. The crowd may have been cheering when you saw them, but the tide seems to be turning. The money changer may have been right. Your Jesus may have crossed the line.
Not my Jesus. I must admit that I am bewildered by what has taken place in the temple. But despite that, I am certain that once you see him, once you hear what he has to say, you will agree. Jesus is not just for me, he's for you too. In fact, I think he may just be for everyone, even though some will never admit it.
It is our Passover week, so I am going to humor you. We can go and find our Jesus, and hear what he has to say. I must insist on one condition, though.
What is your condition, dear?
Please watch your tone. I'm being quite reasonable. When we do find him, I am sure there will be a crowd around. His kind always draws a crowd. My condition is this: we will stay toward the back of the crowd. That way, if any sort of trouble arises, we won't be caught up in it. Do I have your word?
I can accept your condition, Abby. All I ask is that you give him a fair hearing, despite your skepticism. You have not dampened my enthusiasm for this man.
That was never my intention. We'll go find him, and then we'll see.
Just outside of the gathered crowd, very near to where Abigail and Elias are watching Jesus, two members of the religious leadership are conspiring to trap Jesus with a question about Jewish law.
I'm telling you, Dashon, that question you're planning to trap him with is not complex enough. He'll see right through it.
Your question is no better. We cannot ask him questions that relate to the prophet.
Oh, I agree on that. He's far too knowledgeable to be trapped with any questions about the writings.
We must attack him on his weaknesses. He must have a character flaw we can exploit.
Well, if he does, I have seen no evidence of it. Since I've been spying on him, observing him, I have seen no weakness in him. All reports I have received have shown no weaknesses in his character or his knowledge. He always speaks with authority and truthfulness.
He has never told a lie or even twisted the truth.
He's never been known to do so.
Aha, then we found it. We found his weakness. If he's unable to lie, then we must ask him a question that, if answered honestly, will cause him to lose favor with the people.
Brilliant! No one identifies or exploits weaknesses better than you.
Why, thank you. But we're only halfway there. Let me think. What sort of question will get him in trouble?
Well, if you want to get him in trouble with the crowd, we should ask him a question that makes him support Rome.
That's good. But then he could go to Pilate for protection.
Well then, I guess we should ask him a question that would even show that he is in trouble with Rome.
What? And have all those zealots rallying behind him? That would even be worse.
Then I'm afraid we're right back where we started.
Not yet, my friend. How about a question that will upset everyone, no matter how he answers? A question that will upset Rome and the people. That way, he will have nowhere to turn and will have the support of his arrest. I think of only one issue that could upset everyone.
Taxes!
Abiathar and Dashon rush off to present Jesus with a question about taxes that they devised. After a while, they returned with their heads bowed in defeat. Sadducees enter the scene, and they too stand near Elias and Abigail. They are disgusted with the Pharisees' failure, but they're determined to come up with a question of their own.
I told you those Pharisees would fail.
Why do you say that?
Well, look at them. Does that look like a victory march to you?
They were just too fancy with their questions. It should have been obvious to them that you can't play word games with this man.
You're right, of course. The direct approach is the way to go. We'll engage him in a theological debate. Then his foolishness will be obvious to everyone. He's giving us the perfect opening.
Every time I hear him speak about heaven, I can barely contain my laughter.
Such an outrageous notion that there is life after death. He'll create an entire following of lazy good-for-nothings who are just simply waiting to die so they can spend forever in heaven.
And even if there is life after death, what could you possibly spend eternity doing?
Exactly. Anyone can see how foolish that is.
Our idea is a masterstroke. We need Jesus to admit that if we follow the laws as they are written, we'll all be an absolute mess if there is a heaven.
That's why our question about marriage is such a good one. Everyone knows the words of Moses insist that a brother's widow must marry another brother. We just applied that rule to a large and very unfortunate family. It may be an unlikely situation, but not an impossible one.
The only suspense that remains is whether or not you'll let him squirm before you finish him off.
My joy will be complete when this heretic is discredited and disgraced.
After a while, the Sadducees return, and they are clearly angry.
Mistaken? He said I am mistaken. And then he had the nerve to dismiss me as if I was a peasant. I'll show him who's mistaken.
He's made a huge mistake crossing you, my friend.
Tamar and Joash leave, plotting their next move. Abigail and Elias have been eavesdropping on these conversations, and they are concerned and worried about what might come next.
They are very angry, Elias.
I must admit, I have never seen one man upset so many people in such a short time. I'm starting to think you may have been right.
Right about what?
Maybe this Jesus is going to bring trouble.
That may be, but I must say you were right about him too. He's unlike any man I have ever met. He confronted those Pharisees and Sadducees with such ease, with such authority. My only fear is that the trouble he brings will fall on him. The religious leaders will not take this embarrassment lightly.
He sure is collecting a series of offenses, and I'm certain that they will not go unpunished.
But those arrogant leaders deserved it.
Not so loudly, Abigail. There are ears everywhere in the city.
I know, but did you see them? So pompous and self-righteous. Jesus may have offended them, but I don't find him offensive in the least. I finally understand what you've been trying to tell me.
What was I trying to tell you?
That my attitude toward him would change once I saw him, once I heard what he had to say. And my attitude has been changed by our Jesus.
Our Jesus.
Oh, I'm still not interested in getting into trouble, but this is a man I could learn to appreciate. He is honest, forthright, and bold. If he survives this week in Jerusalem, we may have to plan a trip to Galilee. I would love to hear more about our Jesus.
Elias and Abigail head off to their lodging. It has been a difficult and troubling day, and they have much to talk about.